Our story begins within the walls of a grand and stately manor. A young man in formal attire stands with a quiet, serious expression. He knocks on a heavy door, announcing himself to a Lady Eleonora. Without waiting for a reply, he pushes his way into the room. He is immediately met with a question about where he has been. This is Arcus, a man who was reincarnated as a mob character in an Otomy game. And for some reason, he has captured the attention of the obsessive villainess. In the world of the game Celestia Kingdom, she was a notoriously wicked character, but his name, Arcus Fort, was never supposed to appear in any of the storylines. He was meant to be nothing more than a background character. He tries to convince himself that none of this really matters. In these stories, the reincarnated hero is usually overpowered, but Arcus has almost no memories of his past life. He only recalls living in a country called Japan, and for some reason, the plot of this specific game. With no family in this new world, he was taken in by an orphanage where he lives a quiet life. He can't help but wonder what the point of it all was. If he were a main character, maybe he'd be using incredible magic and living a grand school life. But he holds on to a sliver of hope that he might still get that chance, even as a powerless nobody. For now, he resolves to simply enjoy the world he's been given. A sudden shout breaks the silence, as Arcus lets out a frustrated cry to the heavens. It seems his frustration has been channeled into intense training. In a flash, the mock battle comes to a decisive end. The winner is declared to be none other than Arcus. His opponent sits on the ground, smiling and admitting defeat. The crowd of villagers erupts in cheers for the young champion. A small child looks up at him, inspired by his incredible strength. Arcus can only smile, hiding the simple truth behind his training. He never aimed to be a knight, only to be useful to the people around him. An older man approaches from behind, offering his congratulations. It's the head of the orphanage, looking on with a proud smile. The orphanage head tells him he'll surely become a fine knight someday. But Arcus playfully dismisses the idea, winking at the man who raised him. The older man then smiles, revealing he has a favor to ask. Arcus looks up, confused by the sudden request. The scene shifts to a lavish, unfamiliar mansion. Arcus sits nervously on a plush sofa, clearly out of his element. He questions if they're in the right place, feeling he doesn't belong. The orphanage head simply explains that someone has requested to meet him. At that moment, a heavy door swings open, and a cloaked figure enters, apologizing for being late. The cloaked figure reveals himself as Adalbert Anshines, the earl who governs this land. Arcus is completely floored to be in the presence of such a high-ranking noble. The orphanage head proudly confirms that this is the boy he spoke of. The earl explains that word of Arcus's recent victory has reached him, and he has a special request. He leans in and asks Arcus to become a friend to his daughter. He admits his daughter has a difficult personality and doesn't get along well with others. But as Arcus considers this, the family name Anshines triggers a memory. At that moment, the Earl calls for his daughter, Eleonora, to come in. And in walks the very same girl from the manor, the game's villainess, Eleonora Anshines. Arcus is frozen in absolute shock. His mind flashes back to the game, remembering Eleonora as the cruel villainess who tormented the protagonist. He was supposed to befriend the final boss of the story's darkest route. The Earl, completely oblivious, insists they'll get along just fine and sends them off to talk. The two are led out into the manor's sprawling, immaculate garden. Eleonora tries to make small talk about the scenery, but Arcus can barely manage a response. The silence between them is heavy, and the situation is unbearably awkward for him. She mentions that her father told her they were the same age. Arcus just stares back, wondering how a child could be so completely expressionless. But as he looks closer, he has to admit she is undeniably beautiful. A main character's charm, he realizes, is powerful enough to captivate you, even behind an emotionless mask. But the overwhelming pressure of the situation suddenly seems to hit him. He stumbles forward, barely managing to call out Eleonora's name. Her expression remains unreadable, her eyes hidden in shadow. As Arcus collapses to one knee, she asks him what's wrong. He tries to deflect, suggesting she can return inside if she's not feeling well. But she misinterprets his concern, asking if he hates the idea of being her friend. Arcus is completely stunned by her vulnerable question. She clutches her dress, saying she understands why he'd want to avoid someone so gloomy. It's not a misunderstanding, she insists, because everyone has always been this way. A painful memory surfaces of being judged and whispered about from a distance. She remembers the cruel whispers, warning that disaster follows in her wake. They judged her for her dark hair and the supposed emptiness in her eyes. Even the children of other nobles were taught to keep their distance. Their faces would twist in fear at the very sight of her. One even accused her of possessing a terrifying power, a magic that could kill. All she had done was look back at them with resentment in her eyes. Arcus is completely stunned by this glimpse into her lonely past. She turns away, admitting that she has grown used to it by now. Reaching for a flower, she says, his reaction is the only one she's ever known. The words hit Arcus like a physical blow, leaving him utterly speechless. To demonstrate her point, she reaches for a nearby flower, and with a single touch, it withers into black dust. Arcus can't believe his eyes, realizing this is her terrifying magic. She explains that everything she touches loses its color and dies. This curse applies not only to plants, but to people as well. Arcus can only stare, whispering her name in disbelief. With a heartbreaking smile, she tells him that he must understand now. She is and has always been a cursed child. He realizes he never knew about the suffering that created the villainess, and the Earl's request suddenly takes on a new weight. For the first time, he wonders if this was the entire reason he was brought to this world. He realizes that to achieve a happy ending in this world, he must befriend Eleonora and avert the game's tragic conclusion. With a new resolve, he calls out her name, determined to create a future where no one suffers. He tells her that he doesn't find her creepy or strange in the slightest. In fact, he thinks she is unbelievably beautiful. Eleonora is completely stunned by his heartfelt words. She's grateful, but still insists her cursed power will only bring harm to others. Arcus acknowledges the danger, but believes there must be a way to control it. He reaches out his hand, uttering a single gentle word. He promises that even if she hurts someone, he will be there to make things right. He looks her in the eyes and asks her to please be his friend. But his kindness only triggers another painful memory from her past. She remembers the cruel voices that called her a demon, and the crushing loneliness that followed. In a moment of terror, she had called out for her mother. She tried to explain how scared she was, but the woman who appeared before her offered no comfort at all. Instead, her own mother looked down on her with cold disdain. She recoiled in fear, begging Eleonora not to look at her with those cursed eyes. The memory shows her reaching out, her voice barely a whisper. She could only apologize over and over again, consumed by a guilt she didn't understand. The little girl covers her eyes, trying to shut out the world's cruelty. She was even made to feel sorry for the crime of simply being born. The painful memory shatters as Arcus's voice calls out her name, pulling her back to the present. He rushes to her side, asking if she's all right and what happened. Eleonora wakes up in her bed, confused and disoriented. Arcus explains that after she collapsed in the garden, they brought her to her room, where she immediately fell asleep from the emotional exhaustion. He offers a gentle smile, telling her she must have just been having a bad dream. He gently calls out her name, trying to get her attention, but her eyes are already welling up with tears, lost in the painful memory. Arcus is completely caught off guard by her sudden emotional shift. She breaks down into sobs, and our boy immediately panics, unsure of how to comfort her. He hesitates for a moment, trying to figure out the right thing to do. Then, without a second thought, he pulls her into a gentle embrace. He softly pats her on the back, offering what little comfort he can. She clings to him, surprised by the warmth of his gesture. In that moment, his earlier words echo in her mind, his earnest plea for them to be friends. She tells him that being with her will only bring him misery, but Arcus immediately refutes it, insisting it would be his greatest joy. She warns him that she will only end up hurting him too, but Arcus insists that no one goes through life without hurting someone. She tries to push him away, suggesting he'd be better off with anyone else. But he grabs her by the shoulders, calling out her name to stop her. He declares with absolute certainty that she is the one he wants to be friends with. His unwavering conviction leaves Eleonora completely stunned. She stammers, completely flustered by his earnestness. Finally, with a small bow, she formally accepts his offer of friendship. The two sit together in a quiet moment, their hands clasped between them. But even now, she can't help but whisper a quiet apology. Arcus puffs out his chest, telling her there's no need to apologize. For the first time, a genuine smile graces Eleonora's lips as she calls him kind. He just smiles back, saying he's only doing what any friend would. But her expression darkens once more, her gaze falling to the floor. She admits she's never had a friend and doesn't know how to act like one. Arcus quickly dismisses her concerns, telling her it's no problem at all. He explains that friendship takes many different forms, and that as she makes more friends, she'll naturally learn how it works. With a confident grin, he insists that it all just comes down to practice. His straightforward logic seems to short-circuit her brain completely. She agrees with a gentle smile, suggesting they take things at their own pace. Arcus returns the smile, feeling a sense of warmth and relief. He muses that they have their whole lives ahead of them to figure it all out. But just a few weeks later, our boy looks completely and utterly exhausted. Eleonora is now constantly by his side, excitedly showing him every little thing. From the tea she's prepared to the stars in the night sky. Arcus can't help but feel that her personality has changed a little too drastically. She leans in close, pulling him from his thoughts by asking if he's listening. But he just smiles to himself, deciding that seeing her so happy makes it all worth it. He apologizes with a sheepish grin, admitting he was lost in thought. Eleonora puffs out her cheeks, clearly not pleased with his lack of attention. She asks if his thoughts were more important than the time they were spending together. Arcus immediately panics, waving his hands and insisting that's not the case at all. He takes her hand in his, trying to reassure her, and declares with dramatic flair that nothing could ever be more important than her. The sudden, intense flattery leaves Eleonora completely speechless. But inwardly, Arcus is just proud of his ability to smooth things over. After all, he knows he's got the charm of a main character on his side. But his moment of self-admiration is cut short as she tugs on his sleeve, demanding to know his taste in clothes. Arcus is left to ponder her sudden and very specific question, but their conversation is cut short by the unexpected arrival of the Earl. Arcus is once again startled by the sudden appearance of Eleonora's father. The Earl apologizes to his daughter, explaining that he needs to borrow Arcus for a moment. As he's led away, our boy can't help but glance back at Eleonora. He sees that she is clearly and intensely upset by this interruption. She tries to play it cool, remarking that Arcus seemed distracted anyway. Her passive-aggressive comment catches him completely off guard. But before he can respond, she takes a deliberate step forward and leans in until their faces are just inches apart. He leans in close, whispering that when it comes to her clothes, anything she chooses to wear is beautiful. The incredibly smooth line leaves Eleonora speechless, while her father watches on from the doorway. A short while later, Arcus finds himself in the Earl's private study. The Earl reveals that a request Arcus made has been approved, catching the boy completely by surprise. He confirms that starting next week, Arcus will officially be a part of the Ancient household. But the Earl's expression turns serious, a hint of concern in his eyes. He asks Arcus if he is truly okay with this arrangement. The Earl mentions he could have simply provided a residence, but Arcus insists he is grateful for the opportunity to work. He firmly states that he has no desire to simply take advantage of the Earl's power. The Earl is taken aback, impressed by the boy's maturity and resolve. He admits that Arcus's character is truly admirable. Arcus smiles, asking if that's the real reason the Earl chose him to be his daughter's friend. With a knowing look, the Earl confirms that Arcus has understood his intentions perfectly. Arcus promises to do his best in his new role, but explains there is one thing he needs to do first. Meanwhile, Eleonora is stewing in her room, clearly still upset. Arcus stands outside her door, sensing her anger and hesitating to go in. He finally knocks, announcing himself to a very sullen-looking Eleonora. She immediately snaps at him, sarcastically asking if his conversation with her father was just that much fun. She looks up at him, asking what he could possibly have been thinking. But Arcus simply bows, offering a formal apology for his delay. He announces that Arcus Fort has officially arrived to serve her. Taking her hand, he declares that from this day forward, he will be her personal attendant. The scene shifts to a grand hall, bustling with preparations for a lavish party. A maid panics, realizing they're short on glasses for the guests. A butler rushes past, shouting orders to change the drink menu. The staff scrambles to coordinate security for the main hall, and in the middle of it all, Arcus is completely and utterly drained. 3 years have passed since he became a servant, and Eleonora is now approaching her 10th birthday. In this world, a 10th birthday is a massive celebration, and the entire household is in a frenzy of preparation. Arcus sighs, realizing he completely underestimated the sheer scale of a noble's party. A maid enters the room, informing him that the preparations for the main hall are complete. She gently notes his exhaustion, telling him he's clearly overworked. He stretches back in his chair, admitting that the previous day was especially hectic. But she cheers him on, saying that thanks to his efforts, everything is perfectly prepared for the big day. Arcus can only offer a tired smile, relieved that their work is paying off. He can't help but wonder how he ended up in this position, somehow finding himself managing this entire party at the tender age of 10. His moment of reflection is cut short as he's called away yet again, rushing to another urgent task. A maid approaches him with a clipboard, asking for his direction on yet another task. He laments that his simple modern-day knowledge has somehow made him the de facto leader of this entire operation. The maid smiles, admiring how he not only comes up with brilliant ideas, but also takes the initiative to see them through. But he reminds himself that every ounce of effort is for Eleonora's sake. He wants this, her first real party, to be a grand celebration just to see her happy face. And for a reward like that, a little exhaustion is a small price to pay. He channels his magic, uttering the words for a creation spell. and materializes a massive stone club, leaving the maid completely stunned. With his energy seemingly restored, he announces he's off to train, already in a fresh set of clothes. The secret to his stamina, he reveals, is a simple recovery spell to erase his fatigue. He flashes a bright smile, telling her they'll both do their best tomorrow. The maid can only sigh, completely baffled by his endless stamina, and so he continues his relentless training late into the night. He swings the massive club with incredible force, unleashing a powerful gust of wind with every strike. But a hand on his shoulder stops him mid-swing, as he decides that's enough for one day. He turns around, startled by the sudden interruption. He's met by the sight of Eleonora and a mysterious, smiling girl with two-toned hair. Arcus is completely flustered, apologizing for being so lost in his training that he didn't even notice them. Eleonora simply asks why he's out so late, worried that he'll catch a cold in the night air. She looks him in the eyes, suggesting that if she gets cold, he can just warm her up. The strange request leaves Arcus completely baffled. He can't help but wonder why she wouldn't just use her own magic for something so simple. She then complains that because of his work, they haven't been able to spend much time together lately. With a blush, she declares that as her servant, he should be by her side at all times. Arcus can only apologize, explaining how busy he's been with the party preparations. She tightens her grip on his shirt, reminding him that all of this effort is for her grand celebration tomorrow. He smiles, and she concedes that since it's for her special day, she'll let it slide. But her expression turns serious as she falls into a thoughtful silence. The mysterious girl with two-toned hair suggests they head back inside before it gets too cold. But Eleonora turns to Arcus with a somber look, asking if he ever feels lonely. He's taken aback by the question, insisting that her father and the other servants have always been kind to him. She seems to dismiss his answer, turning away and telling him she's counting on him for the big day. But a sudden sneeze cuts through the quiet night air. Arcus instinctively casts a spell, surrounding her with a gentle warmth. His simple act of kindness leaves her completely speechless. The next day arrives, and the grand hall is filled with nobles for the celebration. The Earl stands before the crowd, welcoming them to his daughter's 10th birthday party. But amidst the splendor, Eleonora stands alone, quietly calling out for Arcus. The Earl gives Arcus a chilling order to eliminate any pests who dare approach his daughter. Our boy can only offer a nervous agreement, understanding the weight of the command. As he scans the crowd from a balcony, his eyes land on two young boys chatting below. A strange sense of familiarity washes over him, a feeling that he's seen them before. And in a flash, a memory from the game's plot hits him like a lightning bolt. He realizes with dawning horror exactly who those two are. Panicked that he was caught staring, he quickly averts his gaze. But when he looks back, the two boys have vanished without a trace. Just then, a voice announces the arrival of the party's main attraction, and Eleonora makes her grand entrance, looking absolutely breathtaking in her formal gown. Rose petals seem to dance in the air around her, captivating every guest in the room, especially one young man in the crowd. She walks with a quiet grace, a stark contrast to the lonely girl he first met. Arcus himself is completely mesmerized by her transformation. She offers a gentle, radiant smile to the assembled guests. Our boy can only watch, a flustered but proud expression on his face. For the first time, she's surrounded not by whispers, but by admirers. The party continues with music and celebration filling the grand hall. He reflects on how much she's grown in the last 3 years. But he laments that his duties as the party's organizer keep him from her side. But his thoughts are interrupted by the two-toned girl, who quietly calls out his name. He rushes to find her, asking what's wrong and where Eleonora's guard has gone. The girl hesitates, struggling to explain the unusual situation. Arcus can only look on in complete confusion, and suddenly, he finds himself seated beside Eleonora on a pair of ornate thrones, wondering how this happened. He can feel the painful stares of the crowd, all of them wondering who this strange boy is. Eleonora turns to him with concern, asking if he's all right since he looks so pale. He can only sweat, internally wondering whose fault this entire situation is. Her cheeks immediately puff out in a frustrated pout. She begins to explain herself with a single defensive word. She explains that as her servant, he's supposed to be by her side, so it's only natural he'd be sitting next to her. With a sudden fire in her eyes, she declares that Arcus is not just some ordinary servant. Arcus is touched by her words, but he can't help but notice the stares of the other guests. Eleonora's expression softens as she continues, insisting that he deserves to be celebrated just as much as she does. He can only look back in confusion, wondering what she means. She reminds him that they're the same age, a fact he can't deny, and it dawns on him that in all his years, no one has ever celebrated his birthday. A memory surfaces of his time as a new servant when he realized his own 10th birthday would pass by completely unnoticed. He understands now that Eleonora had somehow sensed his quiet loneliness. Arcus is moved, realizing she wanted him to be treated as an equal guest of honor. He remembers the sad, lonely girl she used to be, and can't believe she was ever destined to become the story's final boss. He turns to her, his voice filled with emotion. He insists that just being celebrated by her is more than enough to make him happy. His heartfelt words leave her a blushing, stammering mess. He steels his resolve, determined to make this party a perfect success for her sake. But his thoughts drift back to the two boys who vanished from the crowd. A sense of unease creeps in, hoping that nothing goes wrong. But from across the hall, a pair of eyes watches them from the shadows. Arcus can only sit there, completely overwhelmed by the situation. Eleonora tries to get him to eat, asking if he'd like a bite of her food. But he's frozen in place, unable to move under the intense scrutiny of every single noble in the grand hall. Just then, a voice cuts through the tension, calling out to Eleonora. A young, confident-looking boy steps forward, introducing himself with a charming smile. He boldly asks her for the honor of a dance, and Arcus immediately recognizes him as one of the boys he saw earlier. The memory of the game's profile screen flashes in his mind. He knows exactly who this person is supposed to be. This is Razer Kilmond, the son of a powerful viscount. Arcus realizes with a jolt that the game's events are starting far earlier than he ever anticipated. He remembers Razer's character, a foul-mouthed delinquent who was surprisingly devoted to the game's protagonist. This boy is one of the main capture targets from Celestia Kingdom. Razer repeats his demand with an arrogant air, insisting that he will be the one to dance with her. Eleonora seems to consider his words for a moment, looking completely unfazed. She turns away from the arrogant noble, and with a deadpan expression flatly refuses his offer. The young lord is left sputtering in absolute disbelief, unable to comprehend the rejection. She explains that it's only natural, as she has no desire whatsoever to dance with him. She begins to explain that she already has a partner in mind, leaving Razer seething with rage. But before the noble can lash out, Arcus steps between them. He calmly blocks the boy's path with a single hand. Razer is completely stunned by the servant's audacity. Arcus introduces himself as Eleonora's personal attendant. The noble scoffs, enraged that a mere servant would dare to defy him, but Arcus calmly explains that his duty is to protect his lady, and he intends to fulfill that duty completely. The sheer force of his conviction sends the arrogant boy stumbling backward. Razer grabs Arcus by the vest, furious that he's being denied his dance. But Arcus calmly tells him to think, warning that a public scene will only bring shame to his family. The young noble can't believe it, questioning why he should listen to a mere servant. Arcus points out that assaulting a servant of the Earl would also cause a significant problem. The logic seems to stump Razer, who can only sigh in frustration. Arcus realizes that for all his bluster, Razer is still just a 10-year-old kid. He offers the boy an out, suggesting he leave quietly before the Earl gets involved. Arcus seems relieved, believing the situation has been successfully de-escalated. He turns and gently takes Eleonora's hand, ready to move on. But a smug grin spreads across Razer's face, hinting that this confrontation is far from over. But Razer suddenly shoves him backward, catching Arcus completely off guard. He stumbles, barely managing to question what just happened. The force of the push sends him reeling across the floor. Razer scoffs, complaining about how annoying noble pride can be. He then explodes in anger, furious that Arcus dared to shame him. But before he can land a punch, a hand appears, casting a sleep spell. Arcus looks on, surprised by the sudden intervention. The arrogant noble immediately slumps forward, falling unconscious. The second boy from earlier catches him, calling out his name in concern. A maid rushes off, instructed to call for the Earl and Razer's father. The adults quickly arrive to handle the unconscious noble, escorting him from the hall. But Eleonora ignores the commotion, rushing to Arcus's side with a worried cry. He looks up from the floor, trying to reassure her that he's perfectly fine. She insists that he should be worrying about himself, not her. Reaching out, she gently touches his cheek, asking if he's truly unhurt. Her eyes fill with concern as she points out that his face is already starting to swell. Arcus just smiles through the pain, dismissing the injury as nothing to worry about. She looks back at him, her voice soft with relief that he's safe. A butler approaches, offering our boy a drink and asking if he's all right. Eleonora can only watch on, her expression a mixture of worry and quiet contemplation. The scene shifts to a private room where the matter is being discussed. The second boy bows deeply, apologizing profusely for his brother's outrageous behavior. Arcus is completely taken aback by the extreme gesture of apology. He quickly asks the boy to raise his head, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. But as he looks at the boy, another name from the game clicks into place. Caesar Killmond. He remembers Caesar as the gentle, princely character who was always a fan favorite. Caesar looks up, explaining that his brother is an even bigger handful than he seems. He goes on to say that Razer was spoiled rotten, used to getting everything he ever wanted. Arcus asks if Razer was truly that set on dancing with Eleonora, and Caesar confirms it. Our boy can't help but think Razer is acting like a child, before remembering that he technically is one. Caesar explains that he simply told his brother to ask out any girl he was interested in. Arcus can only let out a quiet, exasperated sound. He then asks what kind of fate awaits the unconscious Razer. Caesar explains that while the Earl is merciful, his brother will almost certainly be exiled. Arcus is completely shocked by the severity of the punishment. He's left speechless, trying to process the sudden turn of events. He tries to calm himself, realizing he got too excited over a word he's only ever heard in fantasy stories. After all, in this world, 10-year-olds are treated as adults, so such a punishment is to be expected. But as he considers the situation, a chilling thought begins to form. He realizes that with this single incident, the capture target Razer Killmond has been completely removed from the story. He wonders if the world is already starting to deviate from the game's original plot. But he hopes that this means Eleonora's tragic fate can be changed as well. His thoughts are broken by Eleonora's worried voice calling out his name. She asks if he's all right, concerned by how long he was gone. Arcus just offers a reassuring smile, telling her there's no problem since there were witnesses. He explains that it just took a while for the formal apologies to be made. Eleonora looks down, quietly accepting his explanation with a sigh of relief. He then bows his head, apologizing for ruining her special birthday party. But she immediately snaps back, questioning why he's the one apologizing when the other boy was clearly at fault. Still, he can't help but feel that he was too naive and should have been able to prevent the incident entirely. He blames himself, thinking he could have prevented this if he'd just been more careful. But Eleonora's quiet voice calls out his name, pulling him from his thoughts. She takes a deliberate step toward him and gently holds his face, forcing him to look at her. She tells him that as long as he is with her, no one else matters. The sudden, intense confession leaves our boy completely short-circuited. She turns away with a blush, admitting she doesn't understand why the party was ruined. Just then, the doors to the room swing open behind them. Eleonora looks at him with a thoughtful expression and suggests that the two of them step outside for a while. They step out onto a quiet balcony, away from the noise of the party. He asks if she ended up dancing with anyone after the commotion, but she flatly denies it, leaving Arcus completely confused. With a slight blush, she admits that she turned down every single offer. Our boy can only stare back in disbelief, knowing that for nobles, dancing is the entire point of a party like this. He can't help but ask why she would refuse every single person. She looks away, shyly admitting that for her first time, she was glad it was with Arcus. The implication of her words hits him like a ton of bricks. She reveals that she had actually wanted to ask him to be her partner yesterday, but she admits with a blush that she couldn't work up the courage to ask. And Arcus realizes this is why she was acting so strangely the day before. He asks if she's sure, admitting he's never danced in his life. She just smiles brightly, confessing that she's not very good at it either. And besides, she spreads her arms wide, pointing out that no one else is around to see them. With a sly grin, she adds that even the moon is hidden from view. Arcus smiles back, agreeing that there's no reason to be embarrassed if they make a mistake. She playfully adds that if he stumbles, she'll have him all to herself anyway. And with a confident smile, she holds out her hand, asking Arcus Fort for this dance. He accepts with a smile, telling her it would be his honor. He gently takes her hand in his, and under the quiet night sky, the two share their first dance. But they are not nearly as alone as they think. From inside, a crowd of nobles has gathered, all of them clamoring to hire Arcus for themselves. Our boy can only sweat, realizing their private moment has become a public spectacle. They praise his composure and his magical talent, seeing him as a valuable asset. Arcus tries to wave them off, finally understanding the source of all this unwanted attention. He turns back, apologizing for the scene he's inadvertently caused. But Eleonora's gaze is fixed solely on him, completely unfazed. She's immediately swarmed by other nobles, all trying to get her attention. But Arcus steps in, politely reminding them that he belongs to Lady Eleonora. His simple declaration sends the other nobles into a formal, apologetic bow. Eleonora can only stare, completely in awe of his smooth deflection. Even the two-toned girl can't help but smile at his effortless charm. And with that, the long and eventful birthday party finally comes to a close. The grand hall falls silent, the guests having all returned home. Arcus thought he could finally get some rest. But he quickly remembers that with every party comes the inevitable cleanup. He wonders if he can possibly finish everything before the sun comes up. He lets out a weary sigh, wishing his next reincarnation came with an easier job. But a gentle tap on his shoulder pulls him from his thoughts. The same maid from before proudly announces that the cleanup is already finished, much to his surprise. She just offers a cheerful smile, confirming her report. She explains that everyone was so inspired by his hard work that they all pitched in to help. He can't quite believe it, asking if she's really talking about him. And that, she says, is the reason they finished in record time. The unexpected praise leaves our boy a little flustered. She adds that seeing Lady Eleonora so happy made all the effort worth it, and Arcus can only smile, agreeing with absolute confidence. The maid tells Arcus that watching him reminds her of the past. She recalls a simple 10th birthday party she once held for a childhood friend. As orphans, it was a modest celebration, but they just wanted to make their friend happy. She explains that she sees her younger self in his devotion to Eleonora. With a warm smile, she remarks that the two of them look just like childhood friends. But that specific phrase seems to catch Arcus completely off guard. The maid just laughs it off as an embarrassing thought, but our boy is lost in his own mind. A strange feeling begins to creep in, a sense that something is fundamentally wrong. He questions the very idea of Eleonora having a childhood friend, because in the entire story of Celestia Kingdom, no such character ever existed. He tries to reason that his very presence is an anomaly, but he can't shake this feeling of unease. The maid's voice pulls him from his thoughts, asking if he's okay. He quickly dismisses her concern, claiming he was just lost in thought for a moment. She tells him to get some rest, but is quickly called away to another task. With a final cheer, she encourages him to keep up the good work. Arcus can only watch her leave, still processing his strange thoughts. He reminds himself that he still has his own duties to finish for the night, but the exhaustion hits him all at once, and he realizes with a jolt that he's fallen asleep. He had completely passed out on the floor right after their conversation, and he wakes to the sound of a furious Eleonora, who had been waiting for him the entire time. He realizes with a jolt that her anger might last for an entire week. He makes his way through the now silent manor, but can't shake the feeling that something is off. He finally arrives at her door, knocking and apologizing for his tardiness. But the room is completely silent, and he wonders if she's already fallen asleep. Deciding it's best not to wake her, he turns to leave, planning to apologize in the morning. But a sudden movement at his feet stops him cold. A shadowy figure lunges from the darkness, pulling him to the ground with a furious cry. The door slams shut behind him with a heavy thud. Arcus is left sitting on the floor, completely stunned by the sudden and aggressive welcome. His eyes widen in the pitch-black darkness of the room. He questions what these strange, shadowy tendrils are that surround him. A wave of pure shock washes over our boy's face. He calls out Eleonora's name, his voice echoing in the empty space. A sudden panic sets in as he wonders if she's even safe. He's still on the floor where he was dragged, the shadows creeping closer. A pair of bare feet steps out from the darkness, wreathed in the same black energy. He tries to move but realizes with horror that his body is completely paralyzed. A single thought screams through his mind. He has to get up, and a familiar voice calls his name as Eleonora appears before him. Arcus looks up, his eyes wide with disbelief. He can only stammer in confusion at the sight before him. Eleonora stands in the center of the room, her cursed magic swirling around her. The dark tendrils seem to emanate from her very being, pooling on the floor. She stares down at him with an unreadable, almost menacing expression, and with a quiet voice, she finally calls out his name. But her tone is not one of anger, but of a pouty child scolding him for being late. The sudden shift leaves Arcus completely and utterly baffled. She explains that he must have been too busy working to even eat properly, so she took it upon herself to prepare a special meal just for him. With a cheerful grin, she pushes him forward, insisting that he eat. Arcus hesitates, pointing out that eating sweets this late will surely get them in trouble, but she just smiles, offering him a cookie and suggesting they can be partners in crime. She holds the treat up to his lips, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Our boy is completely flustered, wondering why she's suddenly feeding him. He gently takes the cookie from her, still addressing her with formal respect. He then points out that since it's not yet morning, her birthday isn't officially over. Changing the subject, he finally asks about the strange magic she used on him earlier. Her cheerful demeanor vanishes in an instant, her gaze falling to the floor. A shadow crosses her face as she prepares to answer his question. She asks him to prepare some tea, and he agrees to her request. But as he turns to leave the room, the shadowy tendrils suddenly reappear, stopping him in his tracks. He looks back to see Eleonora, still wreathed in that dark, ominous power. She explains that this is her unique magic, her Celestia. The name hits Arcus with a jolt of recognition. He recalls that Celestia is a special magic granted to individuals, a key element of the game's world. He turns back to her, asking when she learned to control it. He realizes with dawning horror that he never knew Eleonora possessed a Celestia in the game. He had only ever seen her use this power for her many rampages in the game's story. She explains that this power was never something she could truly control. But as she pours the tea, she admits there's more to the story. The saucer nearly slips from Arcus's hand as he listens in shock. Eleonora stands before him, her expression somber and distant. She apologizes, saying she never meant to frighten him with her power. She reveals that just last month, she woke up to find her magic overflowing, completely out of her control. Arcus is stunned, realizing she's been hiding this from him for weeks. He can't help but ask why she would keep such a dangerous secret. And with a trembling voice, she admits she was afraid that he would hate her for it. The confession leaves him utterly speechless, his mind reeling from her words. He was terrified, finally understanding why she was called the enemy of humanity. But she tries to brush it off with a smile, saying the power is actually quite convenient. Her cheerful facade quickly crumbles, her expression turning somber. She admits that earlier today, when he was pushed to the ground, she instinctively let a little of her magic slip out to help him. The revelation hits him hard, leaving him completely stunned. Seeing his shock, Eleonora immediately begins to panic. Her eyes widen with the familiar fear of being rejected. It was just like all those other times, when the world confirmed her deepest fears. She looks down, accepting the painful truth that she is, and always will be, cursed. She explains that no matter how hard she tries, her cursed power always overflows, and she fears that one day Arcus will disappear because of it too. Our boy can only stare back, completely stunned by her grim prediction. She reveals those were the same words her mother spoke before she vanished. The mention of her mother shocks Arcus, a character who never existed in the game's story. Eleonora explains that her mother also couldn't control her magic and was shunned while protecting her. The memory shows a small, crying child being comforted by a gentle hand. Her mother could only offer a sad, strained smile in the face of their isolation. But when Eleonora turned 5, her mother simply packed her bags and left, never to return. The revelation hits Arcus with the force of a physical blow. He finally understands the painful past that created the girl he first met. He can't bring himself to deny the deep wounds she carries in her heart. She accepts this as her fate, a life of being abandoned and feared. The fact that her own mother left her is a truth she can never escape, and she believes that eventually everyone will do the same. But Arcus reaches out, refusing to let her finish that thought. He grabs her by the shoulders, calling out her name to break the spell. She can only look back, completely stunned by his sudden action. And with a fire in his eyes, he decides he will be the one to affirm her existence. He tells her that being hated is not her destiny, determined to pull her back from the darkness. He admits that her Celestia might indeed make people fear her, and that others might curse her for it. But he promises that no matter what, he will never let go of her hand. His unwavering promise leaves her completely and utterly stunned. A quiet moment passes between them, his words hanging in the air, but our boy immediately starts to second-guess his dramatic declaration. Eleonora's voice is barely a whisper as she calls herself hopeless. A sad, self-deprecating smile crosses her face, but she then admits that she was secretly hoping he would say exactly that. Arcus can only look back at her with a gentle, knowing smile. He gently holds her face, insisting that every word he said was true. He pulls her into a warm embrace, a single thought solidifying in his mind. He has to protect this girl. He'll do it as her friend and as her servant. And as her childhood friend, but that final thought suddenly stops him cold. He questions the game's plot, wondering if simple discrimination was truly enough to turn her into a villain. But their recent exchange has given him a new clarity. She looks down with a sad smile, admitting that without him she would have completely fallen apart. Her quiet confession leaves him completely stunned. She admits that the thought of him disappearing was too terrifying to even imagine. Arcus gently tells her to stop talking about such cursed things, but as he speaks, a memory suddenly flashes in his mind. He remembers that he is the one who is destined to disappear. A memory from his past life of him reading a guidebook for Celestia Kingdom. He recalls the character profile for the villainess, Eleonora Anshinus, and a key detail he had forgotten. Her descent into villainy was caused by the loss of her childhood friend. He realizes with absolute horror that if things continue as they are, he is going to die. In 5 years, by the time he turns 15, his story will be over. And because of his death, Eleonora will fall into darkness and become the story's final boss. Eleonora's voice pulls him back to the present, her expression filled with concern. She asks him to believe in the promise he just made to her. But Arcus can only stammer, his mind still reeling from the horrifying truth. It's as if her own power is whispering a prophecy of his inevitable betrayal, a future where he is destined to break her heart by disappearing forever. The crushing weight of his fated death sends him spiraling. The scene shifts to the training grounds, where Arcus is pushing himself past his limits. He grits his teeth, insisting that he's perfectly fine. With a desperate grip, he raises his sword once more. He knows there is no time to rest because in 5 years or less, his life will be over. He declares that by then, he will have become the strongest. Day after day, the sounds of his relentless training echo through the manor grounds. He pushes himself to the brink, sweat and determination etched on his face. A fellow servant begs him to take a break, but Arcus insists he's perfectly fine. But the other boy explains that's not what he's worried about. Because every time Arcus trains, he draws the intense, unwavering attention of Eleonora. The servant admits that her constant, terrifying gaze is starting to unnerve everyone. He finally convinces Arcus to take a short break, much to his relief. But a sudden footstep announces the arrival of Lady Eleonora herself. Arcus is startled as she tells him he could have just called out to her if he needed something. She smiles, saying she didn't want to interrupt his hard work. He explains that his studies for the day are already finished, but he's caught off guard as she suddenly steps in closer. With a sparkling smile, she asks if she can praise him for his efforts. The sudden request leaves our boy completely flustered. He tries to play it cool, but she's clearly just happy to be near him. So he decides to praise her instead, patting her gently on the head. She closes her eyes, leaning into his touch with a contented smile. But his thoughts drift back to the night of the party, and the horrifying truth that her fall to darkness was caused by the death of her childhood friend. He collapses in despair, realizing he thought he had managed to change the story's path. But in the end, he hasn't changed a single thing. The frustration of his powerlessness is a bitter pill to swallow. He knows that if he dies, she will become the story's final inhuman boss, a fate he must prevent. He even considered pushing her away, forcing her to hate him to break the connection. But she just holds his hand to her cheek, asking for more affection. The thought of actually rejecting her now is far too terrifying to even consider. So he continues to pat her gently on the head, offering what comfort he can. She smiles, admitting how happy his simple gesture makes her. But a single selfish thought echoes in his mind. He doesn't want to die. He comes to a single grim conclusion. He must become the strongest and survive. But his relentless training has not gone unnoticed by Eleonora's watchful eye. She confronts him directly, pointing out that he's been acting strange lately. Arcus can only stammer, completely caught off guard by her observation. He could never tell her the real reason. That his fated death is what will turn her into a monster. But just as he's about to crack, a hand suddenly grabs his shoulder. The other servant steps in, explaining that Arcus just wants to show off for her at an upcoming training ceremony. The sudden fabricated excuse leaves our boy completely stunned. The servant continues, explaining that Arcus has been pushing himself ever since he turned 10. Eleonora turns to him, her expression unreadable as she quietly calls out his name. Arcus quickly makes an excuse, claiming he's not feeling well and has to run. But Eleonora's sad, knowing gaze tells him she doesn't believe a word of it. He turns and flees, his mind screaming that this is bad. He sprints down the hall, a single thought echoing in his mind. This is very, very bad. He can't believe he could have forgotten something so critically important. How could he have possibly overlooked such a detail, when the training ceremony is the very event where he's most likely to die? It's a rite of passage where 10-year-olds enter a dungeon to prove their worth. And while it's meant to be safe, he knows this is where the story's first major tragedy occurs. He's left completely powerless, wondering what he could possibly do to change his fate. He's left with a single terrifying question. What can he do to survive? He takes a deep breath, the weight of his fate pressing down on him. But he refuses to accept it, vowing that he will not die. With a new fire in his eyes, he pushes forward, ready to fight for his future. He buries himself in books, studying every magical text he can find. He spars relentlessly, honing his physical combat skills, and he pushes his magical abilities to their absolute limit. Day and night, he pores over ancient knowledge, preparing for the ceremony that could seal his doom. He's exhausted, but his will to live has never been stronger. He absorbs every last drop of knowledge, hoping it will be enough. And just like that, the day before the ceremony arrives, Arcus goes over his notes one last time, trying to anticipate every threat. He's done everything he possibly could to prepare for what's to come. But he can't shake the feeling that tomorrow he is still fated to die. He slumps over in frustration, wishing he at least knew how it was supposed to happen. This impossible game he's been forced into feels utterly unwinnable. He wonders what kind of death could be so devastating. That it would be the very thing that breaks Eleonora's heart and turns her into a monster. The next day, he and Eleonora stand at the entrance to the forest, ready to begin the trial. Eleonora looks down, her expression filled with a quiet worry for him. He gently takes her hand, telling her not to be afraid. Arcus promises that no matter what happens, he will be the one to protect her. She looks up at him, asking if he isn't scared of what's to come. Inwardly, he admits that he's been terrified ever since he learned of his fate. But he puts on a brave face, insisting that the thought of her getting hurt is far scarier. He tries to move the conversation forward, ready to begin the trial. But she looks at him with pleading eyes, asking if she can truly count on him. Her earnest question catches him completely off guard. He finally agrees, trying to convince himself that he's done everything he possibly can to prepare. Arcus looks ahead, a single bead of sweat betraying his inner turmoil. He tells himself that all he can do now is believe in his own strength. And with that, the two of them step forward, heading into the darkness of the forest to begin their trial.